All right, all right, all right. Week 3 in CIT 93. The lines up. Okay, so this is actually, I'm recording this in the first week of this semester on Thursday. And several of you have already submitted your last item for week 1. Actually, I think it's for week 2. Actually, several of you have already done that. And I've given you feedback in the discussion. So one of the things I want you to know is that I do go in and look at your code and I give you feedback. And this is the way we all learn, right? And sometimes I'm a little hesitant because I don't want you to feel overwhelmed, or hopefully my goal is for you not to feel criticized, because feedback can sometimes be felt as criticism, right? In this case, it's just feedback on your code to try to help you be better at coding. That's really what its intention is to be. So I'm just going to tell you this is going to happen. And here's the other thing: the sooner you post in the week, the more time it gives me to move through there. I actually wake up, generally schedule my day so that I attempt to look at everything that has been submitted the prior day or the prior evening. And I try to get through it all, but sometimes based on the amount of content that I have, I don't always, but it is my goal. So that if you're submitting a little early, it gives me more of a chance to give you that, and it gives you more of a chance to see it. And sometimes you don't, it's like, good, great, keep going. Right? And this is also where looking at other students' code once you have coded, and you know I've been harping on that idea, is that coding it on your own or getting help, right? For me, and in this case, I've actually, this this attendance post, I've given you Zach's hours, and here they are. So you can reach out to Zach. He works in the tutorial center, and I believe I'm very sure he's on our Discord as well. So if you have gotten onto Discord at this point but don't see the class chat, make sure you ask me to include you. I think there was an expired link that happened, and I fixed that. So again, if you're not on Discord, consider joining. It is not required. It is just another way to get support, because there's a good chance that some of the times that you're working, like anytime after 6 or 7 at night until the late into the evening, I'm not going to be around. I'll tell you one thing about me. I prioritize sleep almost above everything in my life. I'm very health oriented. I eat good food. I work out a lot, and sleep is my priority for a lot of reasons that if you want to ask me about, I'd be happy to talk about. And really, we should all be prioritizing sleep. The amount of data that is out there right now showing the importance of sleep, the more we sleep, the better we function. And I know this is absolutely true for me. Anyway, back to why Discord is helpful is you are not going to hear from me when you're possibly working. I notice that many folks, based on their lives and their schedules and just their preferences, will be working different times than I am. Okay? So I wanted to just be clear about that. And that's why I say resist the temptation to ping me to at when you do at and you put somebody like you do. That totally makes sense when you were asking me to get onto the class chat, but you wouldn't want to do that when you're asking a question, because some other student would see you ping me like that or tag me and think, well, Rio's going to answer that, when I'm, based on the time of day, I may or may not. Okay. All right, so here's the other thing. I also read your replies when I was talking about the code review, and some of you were making comments like, it's just an opportunity for me to ask questions, and I just want to clarify, because I don't want you to have, not, it's good to ask questions. The best place to ask questions is during office hours or when you and I connect. The code review is more like a comprehensive final. Okay, it's not, it's, you come in, I'm going to ask you questions about the concepts we've covered and or the code that you've already written for the development, like as an example, right? code review window opens here. I talked about this, so we will have at least 2 weeks because you're going to end up writing code based on some requirements. And this dev work is going to look very similar to what we're doing with the app that we're creating. And in this case, I wouldn't call it an app, I'd call it a form for us to process the user input for the carbon footprint. We might not even get through all 8 categories. Right? That's okay too, because we have enough in this content to show you how, because we're going to end up moving. Matter of fact, this week, we're going to end up moving to functions. We'll introduce, matter of fact, let's just look at the content you're going to have this week. Now, this content for this week I had recorded before the start of the semester, which is not a big deal. I don't know why I even mentioned it, but you're going to learn about primitives and strings, conditionals and comparisons, and then for the hands-on, the discussion, right? So these 2 are the code along, again, where you're coding in your private repos, you're doing the commits, so important, right? Because remember, that's high grade is on commits. For these 2 items, and then in here you're sharing that URL, and you saw this in week 2. We continue this for this week, and we do the household. We actually are going to write the code for the household, just the first category. Okay, yeah, so we're actually going to write the code for that this week. Okay, one thing I want to say, so that's kind of the setup. And this is going to be what it looks like, right, for the weeks going forward, right? And then when we get to dev work, we'll see a little something different, because then I'll be saying, okay, here's your requirements. As a matter of fact, writing logic is what you're going to end up doing, if statements, okay? This is part of what probably the first dev is. I'll have you write logic. Now, what are you creating here? It's going to be a decision-making app. Now, I'll give you examples of this. We'll talk about this. The decision-making app is something very common. Matter of fact, the most common thing students do is what we call a to-do app, but I've actually kind of taken it to a little different level and doing a common decision. But you'll hear me talk about that as we move forward. Okay? So let's come back here, because one last thing I want to talk about, and by the way, in your reply here, you could ask me clarifications on any of this stuff. But one thing I want to make sure, and I'm going to go over to VS Code, right? And actually, I'm going to pull up in VS Code the week 2, right? Because one thing that can be I may use this term, you hard-coded something. So when I'm hard-coding in the HTML here, right? This is not when I code it in here, not code it when I write it in here, because this is just content, and I am writing code, so it is true. But in this case, I'm hard coding the content, right? So if I was to just put a number here, right, that's not the idea. And if you ever hear me say the term, you're hard coding that, right? The idea is that we're not hard coding it. We're actually having JavaScript update our HTML once it's rendered. And really the term we would use for that is we're manipulating the DOM, the document object model. Okay? So if you've heard, I'm just introducing you to terms that you're going to hear as we move forward. And I had a couple of students, and this is totally understandable, is they were actually doing this but not having their code update the web page, and I gave them feedback that said, hey, make sure that your code is actually updating it, right? So in this case, right, here's my example of last week's. And notice how, and this is the other thing I saw, was that some folks use variable names that were just like variable values 1 to 8, and that wasn't the idea there either. Even though that works in JavaScript, the idea is that you create variable names that describe the data that it holds. Now, why do you want to do that? Because when you're reading it later, you'll know what it represents, because if you just put a generic name, you're not going to know by reading it. And one of the things you can do is by writing good, and this is a term called declarative code, and basically what that means is code that's readable. Like you should be able to, even people without programming coding knowledge, if you write good variable names, good function names, which you'll see this week. Somebody should be able to just read through your code and know what it's doing from reading it, from reading the names, right? Now, in this case, some of you actually did a better job than I did in this example of writing comments that represented what that code was doing. Even better. So if you combine good declarative code with comments, then it should be very straightforward for somebody else, or even you later, because here's the other reality. Like, I'll write something, I'll pick it up a couple months after, and I have to go, why did I do it that way? And if I've written code that's more declarative and given comments, then it's going to be better, more chances, more likely I'm going to understand it, and for sure somebody else would understand it. Okay, so that's the other thing. Use semicolons going forward. I do mark off for that because like I told you, I was kind of like didn't want to do it, but I did. Right? Use camel case wherever possible. If you're going to use two, right? If you use one word, you don't have to, like in this case, waste is fine. But my waste or some other word that described that, then the second word, the first character would be uppercase. That's camel case. And the other thing is when you're writing code like this, try to put all of your code related to the update. So this is code that we've at least been slightly introduced to that updates the DOM. That's what this code is doing. So kind of try to keep some of that together. So when somebody's looking through your code, it's like, okay, and these are variable declarations. Okay. And actually, when we're using const out in the global scope, which we haven't really talked about scope, we're going to get scope next week. We actually use all uppercase sometimes so that people can see these are our constants. But right now, I'm just leaving it like this because you're just getting introduced to these concepts. So that's kind of some feedback that I saw. And the other thing is, the sooner you learn DevTools, the better. I'm telling you right now, the sooner you learn, the sooner you get familiar with, and I'm just going to stop my server and do this, right? The sooner you can go in, hit inspect, because I showed it this week, come here to see console, because oftentimes you may, now this message, even though it's red, is just a 404, it's just saying I don't have a favicon, if you know what that is. It's basically these custom icons like these. But this is also where if your code is broken, as a matter of fact, if you go over to source, right? And by the way, if you can't see your JavaScript file when you go in here, that means your script file is actually in error. But learning how to set that breakpoint, refreshing that page, right? It stops right there. It allows you to see exactly what's happening. Okay? And notice I had hard coded that number in here. And so if I just let that run, right, you see that hard-coded value, it's kind of coming back to what I said originally, right, was updated through the JavaScript in this 2 lines of code. So in reality, I didn't have to put anything in there because my JavaScript it referenced the DOM that had been rendered, and it said, find me the H2. And we'll talk about if you have multiple H2s or H1s or other things on the page, how you would do that. And then it says, hey, update that content by calling text content. And by the way, some of you used inner HTML because you had some experience. That's okay for now, right? And we could talk about the difference between inner HTML and what text content does. But for the beginnings part of this class, whatever works to update the DOM is fine. Okay. So I hope that kind of gives you some clarity. This is your week 3 in your reply, right? If you have any questions about the tutor or anything I've covered, if there's any clarification you would like to do, our discussion is a little different this week in the respect that, I definitely want students to ask for help. It's kind of the way I've set it up because we're going to be writing functions this week. And functions is really something that if you've never written them, the first time you start to write them can really look foreign. But it's just basically saying function is a series of statements that I can I can call, run again and again. And knowing how to write good functions is such an important part of programming. Okay, enough from me. Have a great week. I'll talk to you soon.